Hello and welcome. Barack Obama came into office talking about a new beginning between the US and the Arab world. But how much will really change as the Middle East continues to dramatically reshape itself politically? One crucial issue Washington needed to address was Israel's illegal settlements. Here's what President Obama said during his Cairo speech in 2009.
The United States does not accept the legitimacy of continued Israeli settlements. This construction violates previous agreements and undermines efforts to achieve peace. It is time for these settlements to stop.
And yet, less than 2 years after that speech, the Obama administration used its first UN Security Council veto to block a resolution declaring Israeli settlements illegal.
The draft resolution has not been adopted owing to the negative vote of a permanent member of the Council.
Many observers believe that voting for the resolution would have well served US interests during a very crucial moment in the Middle East, as the Palestinian issue has always united Arabs. So today we ask, has the US missed an opportunity yet again to engage constructively in the Middle East? The phone lines will open in a little while, but for now you can join the discussion with your questions and comments via email and text messaging. Well, joining me on the show is Zalmay Khalilzad, the former US ambassador to the United Nations. We'll be talking to Dr. Khalilzad in just a few minutes. But first, I had a chance to talk a short while ago with the world-renowned British-Pakistani author and critic Tariq Ali. I began by asking him how similar he found the Middle East policies of the Obama administration to those of the former US President George W. Bush, particularly when it comes to the Palestinians.
Well, I think they're very similar. As far as Israel is concerned, there's been no change at all. And essentially what Obama is doing in Israel-Palestine is exactly the same as Bush, forcing the PLO to accept everything that the Israelis are asking for. As Al Jazeera has already revealed in the Palestine papers, something that people like myself had been saying for a long time, that the PLO leadership has capitulated totally and completely. And I really wouldn't be surprised if what we're seeing elsewhere in the Arab world, in Cairo, in Tripoli, in Tunis, in Sana'a, doesn't spread to Ramallah soon, because I think that ordinary Palestinians are fed up with their leadership and the repression that has been meted out to them. And on that, Obama and the Israelis, like Bush and the Israelis, are at one.
Now, when we last spoke, we talked about your book, The Obama Syndrome, your recent book, and in that you were saying how you were very critical of the Obama administration's continuation of the Bush policies on Iraq and Afghanistan, saying that really the mood music had changed and there was a sugarcoating. Has there even been an effort to sugarcoat what's happening with the Israeli-Palestinian situation?
None at all. There's been no attempt to sugarcoat the Israeli policies. And given what is going on in the Arab world today, where huge mass popular movements for democracy are toppling dictators that have been backed by the West, the argument that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East is proving to be total and complete nonsense. The argument that the Arab people are not interested in democracy, that Muslims are genetically incapable of liking democracy because of their religion, is shown to be the complete nonsense and gibberish that it was when the neocons were spouting it. And it's the same gibberish when the Israelis spout it. I mean, the Israeli press and media was the most staunch supporters of Mubarak, put enormous pressure on Obama not to allow Mubarak to be removed, but there was nothing any American president could have done. So gradually what the Arab people are doing is exposing Israeli pretensions in the region. The Israelis used to say to Washington, "We'll be your base forever, for eternity, in this heart of darkness that is the Arab world." Well, if things carry on going as they are, the only heart of darkness in the Arab world will be Israel.
Now, what, if any, consequence do you expect from the recent veto on Israeli settlements by the US, when back in 2009, Barack Obama said in Cairo, well, we're totally against the idea of any more Israeli settlements?
Nothing much is going to change on that, Riz. You know, they say one thing one day, another thing the other day. Essentially, what the Israelis have done is given token support to American advice, which is weak, as we know, in any case, and carried on disregarding any real instructions they may or may not be getting from Washington. And the number of settlements that have been built and are still being built on the West Bank and in the occupied territories makes the idea of a two-state solution laughable, a farce. It's not going to happen because it can't happen. It can't happen physically because of what the Israelis have been up to. So the Israeli leadership may not like to hear this, but essentially what they have done is made a single state in Israel-Palestine inevitable over the next decades.
It's a shame. It seems like there was a critical juncture here, an opportunity for the US to send the right kind of message to the Arab and Muslim world about the issue of the settlements, to show perhaps a little more solidarity with what's happening in the Middle East.
I don't think they're capable of that. For some reason, they regard at the moment Israeli and American interests in the region as exactly one and the same. And that certainly helps and suits the Israelis, but it is now very damaging to any American administration that rules, because the argument which they've used till now is that the Arab world is led by dictators and unrepresentative kings, and we have to deal with the people we see. Well, the Arab people are now demanding democracy in Bahrain as well as in Egypt and Algeria and the Yemen. And who is denying them this? The people who are denying them this are the militaries. Who backs the militaries? In the case of Egypt, the United States. In the case of Tunisia, the French, backed by the United States. So we see a very clear situation now in the Middle East where the masses want democracy, sections of the army want democracy, and the democracy is being denied to the people. They're being told to wait, obviously so that some what they call orderly transition can be agreed, because they are fearful in the West that if the Arab people are allowed to vote and choose their own governments, the governments might not do the bidding of the West. And what we're seeing in Libya today, I mean, only several months ago, British governments were knocking on the doors of the Libyan government, pleading for money, pleading with them to buy British arms, British trade. British companies were going. Gaddafi was funding the Global Governance Institute of the London School of Economics. All this was going on regardless of the situation in Libya and the conditions of the people of that country. That too has imploded now. So the Arab world is witnessing a second wave of democratic and national revolutions in which they want both democracy, they want to break with neocolonial rule, and they want to determine their own futures. And this is a very exciting time for the region. And if the Europeans and the Americans were intelligent, this is the time they would put real pressure on Israel and threaten that country with sanctions.
Now, it's interesting because we had an email, if I could put to you, that came in from Karachi, from Pakistan, from Ahmed Ali Birjarani, who says, the US needs to show that it is friendly to the people. It has no choice but to support the newly forming democratic governments across the Middle East. Do you think that's the case?
Well, I think their choices are limited if they allow such governments to come into existence. As at the moment, what is taking place in Egypt, we have a Supreme Military Council which hasn't lifted the state of emergency, which imposes a strict curfew, which essentially is not sure of what it's going to do. And what needs to be done is very clear. A, there should not be a military council in Egypt. There should be a council which involves all the political parties and obviously includes representatives from the army. This council should then agree a timing for the election of a constituent assembly to determine and create a new constitution according to which new elections should take place. That is what should happen in all the Arab countries, and that is the demand. People want constitutions which guarantee political freedoms and social rights. And that is what they have been fighting for, and any attempt to resist them will result in further upheavals.
Well, another email we had that came from Bangladesh, from Masihul Haq Chowdhury, who says, from Dhaka, says, the US and its allies can play an important role in the region if they interpret the sentiments of the revolutionary masses. They should be careful to avoid the mistakes of Iraq and Afghanistan. It seems the US has largely kept out of this up to now, played very much a backseat role.
Well, it has played a backseat role because it's had no alternative, though I think what is clear is that Marshal Tantawi, the Egyptian chief, was told by the Pentagon not to inaugurate a bloodbath. I think that's very clear, and that was sensible, because had the Egyptian army tried to crush the revolutionary movement, the democratic movement, the army itself would have split, and we would have seen in Egypt what is now taking place in Libya, where Gaddafi simply refuses to go, is surrounded by security forces from his own tribe. The bulk of the country is collapsing around him. The second largest city is under the control of Democrats, and people want him out. And if he was sensible, he would now resign and get out, but he doesn't do it. He's more eccentric than some of the other leaders in the Arab world. So the United States were totally caught by surprise when this happened. They should have recovered by now, and they should accept the democratic will of the people. They've not done so in the past. They've certainly never done so in Saudi Arabia. But given what is going on, it's only a matter of time before the revolts that we've seen, especially in Bahrain, spread into the Saudi kingdom. The Saudi rulers are well aware of this, which is why they're extremely nervous.
Do you see this as a genuine coming together of the so-called Arab street?
I think, Riz, it's not just the Arab street, though it is primarily that, the much mocked, much maligned, much derided Arab street, and people said the Arabs are dead, they're incapable of doing anything. Well, they've risen again, as they rose once before in the 60s and 70s, but they've risen this time in a totally different world, in a totally different context. The first wave of Arab nationalism, Nasser in Egypt, Qasem in Baghdad, radicals in Damascus, revolutions in the Yemen, etc., took place when we were living in a multipolar world. And so they could be more daring, more innovative, more bold in what they demanded. The democratic revolutions that we're witnessing today in the Arab world are taking place at a time when the United States is the dominant power, not just in the region, but in the world, certainly militarily and politically, if not economically. The Europeans completely follow American dictates all along the line. So in this situation, the insurgent masses cannot achieve what their forebears did. They have to operate in different circumstances, but so far they're doing it very well, and the demands they are making are impeccable. Democratic demands for democratic elections, democratic constitutions. And the West, in which democracy itself is hollowing out, because you have political parties running governments without any differences, no basic differences with each other, both in Europe and in North America, should actually be encouraged by this outburst, flowering of democracy in the Arab world. It's extremely positive and has a lot to teach the West.
That was Tariq Ali speaking with me earlier. Now over to my guest, Dr. Zalmay Khalilzad, who served as the US ambassador to Iraq, Afghanistan and the United Nations under the George Bush administration. He now also sits on the board of the Washington-based National Endowment for Democracy. Ambassador, it's good to have you on. The phone lines are now open. You can actually call in and speak with Ambassador Khalilzad as well if you want to. So I want to get some of your responses to what Tariq Ali was saying. He holds back no punches. But I have to ask you, were you surprised with the domino effect that's taken place and the speed with which it happened?
Oh, absolutely. Although one is not surprised that the instability in the Arab world was going to lead to a reaction on the part of the people, because governments were repressive. The people were unhappy because of the economic circumstances, because of lack of political freedom, and they were being more educated and netted with each other and with the world, aware of what's going on around the world. So there was this revolutionary gap, state going one way, society in another, that something was going to happen. But the timing and the way it has happened and the way that it has spread has caught everyone by surprise.
But hasn't it, Ambassador, in one real instance shown how the Arab world can create change by itself, and certainly much more cheaply, effectively, and without the US coming in guns blazing?
Well, absolutely, of course, and this is very inspiring and very positive, because some of us who argued for democratization of the broader Middle East after 9/11, arguing that one of the reasons for why extremism and terror was being produced in some parts of the region was because of the dysfunctionality of the region, and one thing that was needed that would be helpful would be the democratization of the region. And there were people who were arguing, no, the Arabs do not want democracy, it's alien to them, they are not ready. And we would argue, people used to say that about Indians, they used to say that about the Japanese, about the Germans, that the Arabs were equally capable of ultimately producing democratic systems. And unfortunately, because the democratization issue got entangled with the unpopular war in Iraq, it developed a negative aura about it. But now I think everyone has to agree that the people of this region are like people everywhere.
Well, let me get a couple of calls in. First one, Mark in Canada. What would you like to add?
Okay. First, I'd like to say, Al Jazeera, I'm glad you're broadcasting in Canada, because actually the response has been great, and just bravo. And I would like to ask your guest, just an observation, my personal, is that everybody's complaining about the slow response to Canada, which has been embarrassing, and the U.S. Wouldn't it be true is that a lot of these nations, such as Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, and Saudi Arabia, a great population are young now, and they've come of age, and they're saying, you know what, we're not going to be told by the West, we're not going to be told by Britain or anything. Right. We are now going to guide our destiny, and we're not that much for sale.
Mark, let me put that to the ambassador this way: is considering what's happened and the speed with which it's happened, are those various populations in each of these countries really set up to create some kind of viable, sustainable transition? Well,
that's a different issue. I mean, there is great potential, obviously, here. It's inspiring. But what will ultimately happen? Can an orderly transition to a democratic order take place? God forbid, or can it lead to chaos? Can it lead to kind of people who have ideas of a new kind of tyranny hijack the agenda or the movement? And I think this is where the world also needs to focus on, how to assist, recognizing that the leverage that the West, the United States, has is limited, that this is really not under anyone's control, but whatever influence one has is to encourage a process that produces successful democratic entities and governments in the region.
A delicate balancing act, though, isn't it? Not to go in and interfere, but to actually encourage them.
Exactly, because there are places where the influence is greater. For example, the influence over Egyptian military that I think the United States exercised was very positive to urge restraint. Now we see with Libya, the U.S. did not have much of an influence in relation with the military, and there is a great danger is of fragmentation, of a continuing civil war, of potential division of the country. That is where the world can, I think, play a more helpful role to facilitate that transition that will be more orderly and lead to a democratic order.
Well, let's get another call here. Jerry in Washington, D.C., thanks for your patience. What would you like to ask?
Yes, I'd like to say that I think the Arabs have a lot to be proud of these days in the Middle East, especially with their nonviolence, and that I think the U.S. policy is trying to catch up a pace with what's going on, and they do have a hypocritical policy with Israel. It makes for schizophrenia, because the U.S. does want to support democratic forces, and I do think that the many things that Secretary Clinton has been saying for pro-democratic forces in the Middle East and support of the rebels is really wonderful, and I think that the only other thing is that the U.S. I think it was very good that Senators McCain and Lieberman were in Tahrir Square yesterday. I think that's a very good sign.
Okay, Jerry, let me ask the ambassador then. This, you know, obviously this is a delicate role here that America's playing, but this issue that Jerry raised about the Palestinian-Israeli dynamic, the whole thing at the beginning of the show, I was talking about how Barack Obama came in saying there will be no settlements, and of course then the veto was used, sending a totally opposite message, a complete flip-flop, and it must come across as very hypocritical.
Well, I think that on the Israel issue, of course, there is a broad agreement in the United States in terms of strong support for Israel. And there has been a long tradition of arguing that perhaps the UN is not the best place to deal with some of the Arab-Israel issues. It's best done through the direct negotiations between the parties. On occasion, we have either abstained or even have supported action there, but that has been rare. I think the sentiments expressed in the resolution is exactly what the administration supports. I think the president stated, like the previous administration, that it was against new settlements, that they were illegal, and that they were in contravention to the desire for a peace agreement.
But then what is said and what is done are two totally
Well, I think that
things.
the doing is sometimes a number of factors get involved, and I was not there, so I don't know what it is. Sometimes some member states do not want a resolution. They want to isolate the United States by putting a word in there that they know will cross a red line for the United States, or it may be that given the Israeli nervousness right now about what's going on in the region, including with Egypt, that this was the timing was an issue that they thought at this time you don't want to put further pressure on Israel. So there may have been various factors, but those are tactical issues. I think on the strategic level, the policy on settlements is quite clear.
Okay, well, two emails I'll put back to back here that we got. One from Junaid Malik, who wrote into our Facebook page. And Junaid says, these revolutions were by the people, for the people. The Israeli-Palestinian issue will probably remain stuck in stalemate. Then a follow-up from Arthur Musazizi, who wrote in saying, America still has a firm grip on the Egyptian military. Nothing has changed, and Palestinians still are not free to cross the border into Egypt. So again, for what's going on elsewhere in the Middle East, it seems that there'll still be this grinding point with the Israeli-Palestinian situation.
I think it may become even more difficult for the United States as a result of the democratization, which is positive, and I think that the U.S., although one could say it was catching up to some degree with events on the ground, is playing a positive role in encouraging governments not to use violence and encouraging Arab governments to reform, to accommodate. But one consequence of democratization is probably going to be that the population of the Arab world is generally takes a tougher view of the Israeli-Palestinian issue than some of the authoritarian leaders do or did. So therefore, I think dealing with a democratic Middle East on this issue, among other positive things that will happen, this is going to be a complicating and a difficult factor.
More pressure on the U.S. on
There
this
will be
front
more
as well.
pressure, more difficulty, but hopefully one can deal with it effectively through engagement and working even harder to get an Israeli Arab-Palestinian settlement.
With less than a minute to go, Ambassador, will the U.S. accept governments that form in the new Middle East if they are democratically formed? We've seen with Hamas, Hezbollah, that hasn't always been the case.
Sure. Well, of course. I mean, that's one thing is about elections, that the elections have to take place at a time when there is a level playing field politically, where different groups can effectively compete. One idea has been that maybe in some places where elections have happened too quickly and there was not a level playing field that produced results that have not been truly representative. But I think the U.S. Can work with the democratic Middle East, would welcome it. This is something that both works for U.S. interests and for U.S. ideals.
Well, Ambassador, never enough time. I will speak to you again soon, I hope.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Sir.
Great to be with you.
My pleasure, sir. Thank you, and thank you for being with us too. Remember, you can follow the show on Facebook and see what we're up to there. You can give us feedback on the topics and post your questions and comments. On the next show, Women in the Revolution. They've been out on the streets making their voices heard, but what role will they get to play in their country's political future? Be sure to tune in for that. From me and the team, we'll see you next time.